Good afternoon. Welcome to this first Mansfield First Take on Russia and Ukraine. We would like to begin with Oksana Neshevenka, Mansfield Center alumna and professor of economics at the National University of Kiev-Moldya Academy. She and her family safely crossed the border from Ukraine to Poland, and we are grateful that she agreed to take part in this discussion. I will now turn it over to Professor Neshevenka.
Thank you very much. Hello. Can you tell me, please, if you can see and hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dina, for inviting me, and thank you, Mansfield Center, for organizing this event, because definitely right now for so many thousands, and I would say millions of people, this is a hot issue, because like I'm now not in my home. I was forced to leave my place where I live, my family. My family is now separated because of this war that is happening. I strongly believe it is not a conflict that many media says this is kind of a conflict. It's not a conflict, it's a war that causes people to be killed, families separated, people lost, buildings damaged, lives devastated. Well, I did not actually prepare any speech, because past 7 days for me, this was totally before and after, because we needed to leave our home in Kyiv. We needed to go to Lviv to hide there for a couple of days. And yesterday we did not have any idea if I would cross the border or not, but we made this decision. So I crossed the border with my child and my parents. But my husband, he cannot leave Ukraine. That's why we are separate right now. And, you know, if anyone asked me 1 week ago if I could imagine that my life will change so drastically in the life of my family, I would never say, come on, this is imagination. I know that USA warned us that war is coming and Russia will invade, but all rational people, we did not believe that this is possible in current world with so many international organizations. How can war happen when so many legislative procedures, laws exist? But now I'm a victim of this horrible happening around me. So if I can imagine what will be in the next days, this is definitely not what I think about. I have no idea what will happen. I have no idea where I will be in a couple of days. I have so many thoughts in my head. Maybe it would be easier to, I see that there is Q&A. If you can ask me any questions, I will be very glad to answer them. Maybe the audience have some clear questions to me. If I can be of use for you, I would be very glad to do that. Sorry if I'm too hectic.
No, we're very grateful to you. And so I encourage the audience to put questions in the chat. Cameron, can you start with one of the questions we got in advance for Oksana?
Absolutely. Oksana, one common question we received was, how can we help Ukrainians, whether in Missoula or in the United States generally?
Well, this is a very difficult question, because I believe that compassion is something extremely painful. I have not cried for a couple of days, even though you all understand that there are so many reasons to cry. But just a couple of days ago, one woman told me, hold on, and I did not hold on. So compassion is, I believe, not something that we need. Like my life changed. Of course, we left all our homes, everything that we worked for, the car, the house, the apartments. But this is something very, very material. We need some hope what will be in the future, and this is the policy debate. This is not what maybe we all can do. This is the White House, the politicians, the European Union, and hopefully Ukraine will become a member of European Union. I believe what people around me can do, and I already have these proposals. like I lost one of my jobs because of this conflict, because of this war, and I have partners inviting me to do some job for them. So something very close to like support, not just giving money, but maybe proposing some research. I don't know. This is really a difficult question, but I don't believe in compassion, because compassion is not really what we need in this situation.
Thank you. We have another question from James. He asks, do young people in Ukraine communicate at all to young people in Russia about what's happening? And is there solidarity between young people in the two countries?
Wow, very, very good question. The answer is no. We have no idea what is happening in the brains of Russian, not even young people, but like whole generation. When I start watching Russian media, Russian TV, I start believing that Ukrainians eat children, that Ukrainians killed innocent women. Like their media is so sick. We cannot really believe what is happening in this media. So we do not communicate. But another thing that I really wanted to tell you in my introductory speech is I'm so proud of Ukrainians and how we self-organized. So when we moved from Kyiv to Lviv, we had in all the villages that we crossed, people who live in these villages, they protect their communities. So they organized these like self-organized, we call them block posts. So they built it with everything they have, so that the artillery, the tanks, Russian these military cars, they cannot move, and they check every car that is crossing their villages. The passports, why do you go there, the language that I speak, so they check if I speak Russian or Ukrainian Russian. My family speaks Ukrainian, so we did not have any issues, but I'm sure that people who may speak Russian, they would have like, why do you go to Lviv, to the Western Ukraine? So like they check everyone who crosses their community. And the volunteering, collecting money, we collected so much funds to support the army, the volunteering. I'm so proud of them. So many Telegram chats, what region of Ukraine needs, like if some village was bombarded and they don't have diapers or milk, there is one message in Telegram and they will receive it in 1 hour. This is one of the reasons I'm proud of my country so much. And I told today to my family that I would definitely be there to help, but I'm responsible for my 1.5-year-old daughter, and I just cannot be there, unfortunately.
Thank you. We have a few questions about your experience crossing the border to Poland. How were you welcomed in Poland, especially in terms of shelter and other needs? And is your family's asylum in Poland temporary, or can you stay longer?
I will start with the second one. We do not plan to ask for asylum. We really hope that this is a temporary action and we will come back to Ukraine. We will be those who will be working on rebuilding it, on investing our intellectual, physical, financial forces to reinvent Ukraine, because I really believe that it will become much better after this ends. Polish, oh my God, Polish people, they are amazing. One more reason to have tears in my eyes today, because I was waiting in the line to have insurance for the car, to buy it. And I see people come with tea. So I decide, okay, I will go to buy the tea and then I will join this queue. But then I discovered that, first of all, tea is free, and there is not only tea, there is everything you may need, diapers, like everything, socks, clothes, toys for children. It was something that really touched my heart and heart of everyone. Like we did not ask for diapers, right? We asked for safety. But it comes all together with people's generosity. Yeah, and one more thing that struck me today I do not remember what is peace. And when we crossed this border with Poland, this surrounding around me of peace and calm, of not being touched by every loud sound, it's before and after.
Thank you, Oksana. Another question is, are the two regions in Eastern Ukraine that we're told are pro-Russian as strongly pro-Russian as reported? Is there a divide between the two, between Eastern and Western Ukraine?
They are not pro-Russian at all. And I am once again proud of our army, because they are using this momentum of Russian army to be much more weakened by us, by little Ukraine. And they just regained Horlivka. This was the village that was under occupation by so-called terrorists, but in fact now all world understands that it was Russians for 8 years. But since today it is Ukrainian. And believe me, not all people in these regions speak Russian language and wait for Russian troops. Definitely not. Many of them welcome Ukrainian army, and Ukraine is absolutely not divided. After this, what happened now, when innocent people for all over Ukraine are killed in Eastern, Western, Central, now everyone understands what is the enemy, and the enemy unites us.
It's very clear that this war is a huge disruption to Ukrainians' lives. And we have a few questions about whether you're able to provide online lectures to your students at this point, or if the universities are closed altogether, and if so, what are the students doing?
So I teach this semester. My last class was 1.5 weeks ago. It was Tuesday, and we do not teach now. It is first of all impossible, because we have no idea where are our students, and we teachers, we cannot think about teaching. I'm sure they cannot think about teaching. Just a perspective, every sound in every city of Ukraine makes you really frightened. How can you think about home tasks? How can you think about exams, deadlines? It's just very naive thoughts. So no, we received a letter from the university that we have 2-week vacation, and students too, but it is not vacation, of course. I'm very afraid to lose some of the students because of this war, and because our university is very patriotic and the nation is very patriotic. So there are many things to think over, how we will make this trauma cured, and how we will integrate it into teaching.
Thank you, Oksana. Can we ask you for any closing comments?
Yes, first of all, yeah, really important that we have this discussion. I hope, even though I was sometimes hectic, sometimes emotional, I hope that some of you understood that what is happening in Ukraine, it is something very horrible. You know, we are not a jungle country, we are not a desert country, we are the most literate country in Europe. We are the country that is the highest exporter of corn. We are the country with the most advanced IT sector in the world, and it is happening. If it is happening in my country, it can happen everywhere, and we need to be very cautious of our Ukrainian enemy.
Well, we are so grateful that you could be here today with us, and this makes a very big difference to get your voice out so we can better understand the situation in Ukraine and how we can better support you and Ukrainians. So thank you so much, Oksana.
Thank you very much.
So I'm Cameron Vaughn, a program coordinator at the Marine and Mike Mansfield Center and recent graduate of the University of Montana's Russian program. My work at the Mansfield Center as an undergraduate student is part of our commitment to support UN students. The Mansfield Center was founded by an act of Congress in 1983 to foster globally minded leaders of integrity. Our programs are supported by people like you. If you find our programming to be of value, we ask you to consider supporting us at any level, such as a $5, $10, or $25 per month donation. We would like to thank Missoula Community Access Television for recording today's discussion as part of a media assistance grant provided to us. The Mansfield Center is committed to issues of integrity, ethics, and international engagement. Last week, the world watched as Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered the invasion of neighboring democratic Ukraine. We condemn the invasion of Ukraine and believe it is valuable to understand both the complex historical and geopolitical factors that provoked the invasion and to provide support for Ukrainians suffering unnecessary tragedy as they defend their nation. We are honored to have with us today expert speakers on the ground in Russia, Ukraine, as well as here at to share context and current developments in the region. Dr. Clint Walker is an associate professor of Russian at This semester, he is teaching the course Putin and the West. He received his PhD in Slavic Studies from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Dr. Alexander Pantsov joins us from Russia. He is a professor of history at Capital University in Columbus, Ohio. Dr. Pantsov was born in Moscow and earned his PhD from the Russian Academy of Sciences. An American citizen, he is presently in Moscow and closely following the events in Ukraine. Clint, can I turn it to you now?
Hi, yes, thank you, Cameron. And thank you, Oksana. I guess first of all, I would like to recognize something that needs to be recognized at the outset. Ukraine has existed as an independent country for over 30 years now. They've had, well, Volodymyr Zelensky is their sixth democratically elected president. And I would like to recognize what is going on as a terrible tragedy. It needs to be stopped. Talks and negotiations definitely have to happen, but this unprovoked attack, it is a war. Vladimir Putin wants to classify it as a special operation in order to avoid the term war. It is a war and it needs to be recognized as such. And there are many sources of Russian media that would like to recognize that, but they have been turned off, literally, by Vladimir Putin, including the radio station Echo Moskvy, for example, Echo Moscow, which is one of the few remaining really independent radio stations, and they've been shut down. They are being blocked, their broadcasts right now. I would like to express unequivocally my full support for Ukraine, for Ukraine's independence. What's going on is horrible. President Volodymyr Zelensky has my full support and my admiration. What I'm going to try to do in a very short period, and it's rather difficult, I feel a big weight on my shoulders, is to try to hit some important points that will maybe provide some context to try to help us understand what's going on and maybe get inside the mind of Vladimir Putin a little bit and try to figure out how he's thinking, why he's thinking the way he is, and maybe it will help us to avoid such a situation in the future. But first of all, I guess I would like to say we want to avoid oversimplifications if we can. This is a very complex situation with a very large backstory, and it needs to be put in a historical perspective in order to be better understood. There is a bigger picture. We really need to strive to try to avoid painting things in black and white and trying to make Russia into an evil empire. We need to remember our own history in the McCarthy era and some of the hysteria that happened in our own country, which we should be very ashamed of. For example, we have a Russian Fulbright instructor visiting from Moscow, Ekaterina Leonova, and she is a wonderful person. She feels horrible about what is going on. And we are so fortunate to have her in our Russian program, and our students absolutely adore her. And I just want to recognize what a wonderful person she is and how this has nothing to do with her. She does not want this happening. So I'm hoping that I can try to put this in a little bit of a larger historical and geopolitical context. Putin's perspective is obviously at the center of this, and we need to attempt to see the world through his eyes. We need to see, I mean, right now, he could be said he's just completely gone off the rails in a sense, and his actions are totally uncalled for, and I do not support them in the least, but I do think it's important to try to understand why he's taking the measures he's taking from his perspective. So first of all, 20th century has had a lot of bloodshed. It's had horrible wars. We've had really three major wars, and 3 times we have been faced with a pressing need to recreate a framework for international relations. After World War I was one of those periods, the Versailles Treaty. And we all know now that the war guilt clause that was invoked and the blaming of Germany had horrible consequences. We oversimplified and we wanted to blame someone, and we blamed Germany. And the consequences were the rise of Hitler. And it's not a direct connection, but there definitely is a connection, and it needs to be recognized. World War II and the aftermath is a second context. After World War II, the geopolitical situation, international relations really needed to be reconfigured. And that's where I would like to pause for a bit, because that's where I think it will help us to understand. So if we look at the aftermath of World War II, Germany in 1945 was divided into 4 spheres of 4 zones. And pretty quickly after that, Winston Churchill gave his famous Iron Curtain speech about the Soviet Union. And by 1947, the term Cold War was already being used in some circles. One of the fundamental figures that we need to address and remember is George Kennan, who was one of the most important political advisors in American history. And he, for example, he's won a Pulitzer Prize and a book award, and but he worked for one of the first ambassadors the first ambassador to the Soviet Union, William Bullitt, and he studied the Stalin period. And eventually, in 46, he sent a long telegram about his perceptions of the Soviet Union. And then in 47, he followed it up with a long article, and it was signed by anonymously X, but it was Kennan, and he created the policy of what is now known as containment, that the Soviet Union needed to be contained and stopped, and otherwise it would spread. George Kennan, his writings also inspired the Truman Doctrine, and then in 1948, the Marshall Plan. So Kennan was absolutely fundamental in the early developments of the Cold War and the aftermath of World War II. As a result of this policy of containment, partially, NATO was created, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and that was in April of 1949. Originally, there were 12 members of NATO, and it was to contain the United States, and it was a collective security agreement. And it was Western powers, and the containment was to contain the Soviet Union. And then the Federal Republic of Germany, West Germany, was officially created as an independent state in May 23rd, 1949. And so that in turn triggered the Soviets to create the East German state, on October 7th of 1949. And so we were already seeing the world literally splitting into two different spheres of influence. And by this point, it was clear we really were in a Cold War. Germany ended up joining NATO in early May 1955, May 5th. And not long after that, the Soviets, in order to counter NATO and create what they call a counterbalance, they created the Warsaw Pact, and that was on May 14th, 1955. So literally the Cold War had developed in a way that was splitting the world into two spheres of influence, the East and the West, or the Western Europe and the United States, and then the Soviets. And Germany became literally a kind of epicenter or a microcosm of this split. The country itself was literally split into two spheres, West Germany and East Germany. And this continued to develop, and Cold War continued to develop, and eventually the Berlin Wall was built by the Soviets in order to stop the flow of Germans from East Germany into West Germany. And anyway, the Cold War just continued. And so we can see the microcosm in Germany. This is the world Vladimir Putin was born into and grew up in. And interestingly, East Germany, the foundation, the celebration of the creation of East Germany was on October 7th. And on October 7th, 1952, Vladimir Putin was born in the city of Leningrad. His childhood was in the aftermath of a World War II that saw 20 to 30 million Soviets die in that war, World War II. And so there were many children without parents, and especially without fathers. And the conditions were horrible. The country had been devastated. The Soviet Union took much of the beating in World War II. And there had been a 900-day siege or a blockade in Leningrad, Vladimir Putin's city of birth. And he lost a brother. One of his brothers would have been one of his older brothers died in that blockade, starved to death, as many people did in that blockade. And so this World War II context and the horrors of the aftermath, and then also living through a period of the containment and the Cold War also characterizes the context in which Putin grew up. Now we fast forward to November 9th, 1989 in Germany. We're in Germany again, and the Berlin Wall falls. Putin is working in East Germany at that time in the KGB, and he's called home. And 2 years after that, on December 25th, 1991, Mikhail Gorbachev, the first and only, the last president of the Soviet Union, officially declares that the Soviet Union is disbanded, and the Soviet Union literally ceases to exist. It's done. Putin will eventually call that in 2004 or 2005 the greatest geopolitical catastrophe in the 20th century, the breakup of the Soviet Union. So these are contexts that we need to recognize. Putin becomes president. He's named acting president on New Year's Eve, 1999 and 2000. He's already president, and then he's elected in the first election for president after the Boris Yeltsin years. And he's been president basically, except for a short 4-year period, from when he stepped into office until the present. And even when he wasn't president, he was a prime minister, and most people recognize he was controlling things. The country was really in shambles. The economy was struggling. In Yeltsin years, there was massive corruption. All the oligarchs appeared and controlled all the assets in the country. And the ruble was worth very, very little in comparison to other currencies. And there was terrorism. There had been a war in Chechnya, and lots of terrorism, attempts to break away from the influence of Russia, the Chechen Republic, and from the Russian perspective, they were rebels. Putin, the second Chechen war was during Putin's early years of being president, and it lasted 10 years from 1999 to 2009. But Putin stopped that war. He took control. He reasserted control over that area. Under Putin's years, the economy also did much better, and Russians saw their their standard of living raised substantially. And Russia had one of the fastest growing economies in Europe for many of those years. This made Putin really extremely popular. Putin, in his early years, concentrated a lot on reestablishing order inside his country. And one of the things that he wanted to do was stop what he felt was Western influence. And so one of the first targets was the media. He disbanded, took over a private, very popular television station called NTV in Russian, NTV. And many of the people that had worked for NTV were arrested or fled abroad, and some to Ukraine. Yevgeny Kiselyov, one of the most popular newscasters in the country, had to leave. And the government reasserted control over the mass media. From there, it was various steps that allowed Putin to basically completely, in time, take back over control of the media. And then Russia Today, a television station with international use for propaganda, was created as well. It started broadcasting in English in 2005. Putin was very frustrated with a whole number of things, and it wasn't just Putin. One of the biggest things that frustrated Putin and people earlier than Putin was substantial expansion of NATO. Putin had understood, and many Russian leaders, including Boris Yeltsin, had understood that NATO would not be expanded after the breakup of the Soviet Union. NATO was created to contain the Soviet Union. So from their perspective, there was no need to have NATO, and Warsaw Pact was dissolved in 1991. Originally, there were 12 NATO member countries, and in 1998, under Bill Clinton, Secretary of State Madeleine Albright worked toward expansion of NATO. Interestingly, George Kennan, who had been the author of the idea of containment, spoke out in a very famous New York Times interview in 1998 and said, quote, "I think that this will be the beginning of a new Cold War. I think the Russians will gradually react quite adversely, and it will affect their policies. I think it is a tragic mistake to expand NATO." There was no reason for this whatsoever. No one is threatening anyone else. A lot of people did not agree with Kennan, but there also were a lot of people who did agree with Kennan. This was controversial in the United States and Europe as well. But in Russia, it was very unpopular, and it was considered a breach of promises that had been understood, but never confirmed legally, that NATO would not be expanded beyond the borders that it had existed under the Soviet Union, the end of the Soviet Union. NATO expansion continued. In 2004, the three Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, were also added as NATO members. Bulgaria, Romania, Slovakia, and Slovenia were added. 2009, Albania and Croatia were added as NATO members. At present, there are 30 members of NATO, and Ukraine wants to join NATO, and it's absolutely their right to join NATO. They are an independent sovereign state, and they should get to decide if they want to join NATO. But from the perspective of Russia, this appears to Putin as a breach, and he first talked about some of this. He sees the world as being US dominated. He uses the word hegemony, US dominance in control of everything. He sees expansion of NATO as completely unnecessary and threatening. And he gave a very famous speech in 2007 at the Munich Security Conference in Germany and really lashed out at the US and basically presented a whole list of his grievances with the US and with what he saw as a unipolar world. He saw as being US going in and creating regime changes, interfering in other countries. One example he gave was the Orange Revolution in Ukraine when President Viktor Yushchenko was elected in a second election. There was a first election, and in the first election, the pro-Russian candidate Viktor Yanukovych seemed to have won, but it was very clear that it was by fraudulent means. It was an unfair election. There had been cheating, and so there was a re-election, and in the second election, the pro-Western candidate Viktor Yushchenko won. He was famously poisoned, and anyway, it's a long story, but eventually Yushchenko lost in an election to the very same candidate he ran against formerly, and the president, Viktor Yanukovych, the pro-Russian, at least seen as pro-Russian candidate, became president, and he was president for quite some time. And then he famously was trying to take Ukraine out of an agreement with European Union trade agreement, and it was seen as Russian influence, and there were protests against it. And this was so-called Maidan, and it was another kind of revolution. And Yanukovych, the pro-Russian candidate who is now president, was basically forced to flee the country. He's now living in Russia. Of course, Putin sees this as more interference in the US, sees it as it's a conspiracy, it's a plot, it was all arranged, it was sponsored by the West. And so these are the types of things that he continued to complain about. And pretty quickly after this ousting of the pro-Russian Yanukovych, Putin annexed Crimea from Ukraine, and spoke repeatedly about the need to protect Russian speakers in other countries, and that their rights were being violated. And he used Ukraine as one of the most prominent examples. Clearly, Ukraine was, to Putin, the most important. He really did not want to lose having control over Ukraine, and feeling like he had special relations with Ukraine, which obviously go back a very, very long ways, but I don't have time to address all of that in this talk. It's a short period. So what was the West's response to Putin's Munich security speech in 2007? In a nutshell.
I'm so sorry. Could I just ask if we could hold and then maybe shift to Dr. Pansoff, because we're running a bit out of time.
Oh, okay, sure, yeah.
And then we'll come back to you in the Q&A period.
All right, that's fine, that's fine, that's fair.
Dear colleagues, dear friends, first of all, I would like to express my deepest apologies to Oksana on behalf of all honest Russian people. I want to apologize for everything the Russian soldiers are doing now in Ukraine. But I want you, Oksana, I want you to know that this is also our personal tragedy. It's a tragedy of mine. It's a tragedy of my wife. It's a tragedy of my family. And I want you to know about it, that we here in Russia, we support Ukraine. We support Ukrainian heroic struggle against the aggression. And this is not a special operation as the Russian state declared. It's a war. It's a terrible war. I just want to say that I am a different Russian. I'm not an aggressor. And you know that we, my family, we lived in Russia under terrible Putin's regime for 23 years. I said we lived under Putin's regime in spite of the fact that my wife and I, we moved to the United States, and we reside and we teach, we work in the United States, but my children, my daughters and my grandchildren, they still in Russia, and we go back to Russia twice a year during our winter break and during the summer holidays. So we actually continue to live in Russia, and our hearts are still in Russia. And we began to understand Putin immediately when he seized power in 1999, when Yeltsin was already sick, and Putin became the prime minister of Russia. And then at the very end of 1999, the last day of 1999, he was appointed the acting president by the fragile president, Yeltsin. And we were shocked because first we knew that he was the head of KGB. And the first time in the history of Russia and the Soviet Union, the head of KGB seized power and became the head of the country. And we couldn't expect anything good from this person just because he was the head of KGB. And the second, around this time, my friend and colleague, Yuri Felshtinsky, who lives in Boston, he sent me a manuscript of his famous to-be book that he wrote together with Alexander Litvinenko. Everybody knows Alexander Litvinenko, the former KGB official who was poisoned in London with polonium by Putin. And the book was titled How the FSB, that's the successor of KGB, blows up Russia. We read the manuscript and we understood that Putin was a criminal. This book put the whole blame for the destruction, for blowing up apartment buildings in Moscow and other Russian cities in 1999 on Putin. And it's a great book. I highly recommend you to read it. It finally was published in the West and never been published in Russia. But it gives proofs that Putin and the FSB blew up the apartment buildings and killed hundreds of Russians in 1999 to justify the Second Chechen War, to make an unpopular war in Chechnya a popular war, because he put the whole blame for these blasts on the Chechens' shoulders, but indeed it was Putin's order. So we hated Putin since then. And then I just want to remind you that domestically, he followed the same criminal terroristic policy. And after the Second Chechen War, he Clint already mentioned that he shut down independent press. He organized the assassination of independent journalists and so on. So, of course, we couldn't expect that finally he would wage a war against such a country as Ukraine, but we had an experience. And in his foreign policy, he began to follow Hitler's policy and began to play his games with the West exactly as Hitler did in 1936, 1939. And he followed the policy of irredentism, trying to rebuild the Soviet Union, claiming that it was the great geopolitical catastrophe, and he tried to protect a Russian who lived in different countries, neighboring countries, exactly as Hitler did in regard to the Germans who lived in Czechoslovakia or in Austria or in other countries. And the foreign policies, first the British and the French, followed the policy of appeasement at that time. And I have to admit that the West, the Americans and the Europeans followed the same appeasement, corrupted appeasement policy in regard to Putin for a very long time. It became very clear for us, for many people in Russia, and for many people who study Russia and teach Russia and investigate Russia, that Putin is following Hitler. And in 2007, in February, as Clint already mentioned, he expressed his vision in his infamous Munich speech. But in 2008, August 8, 2008, he attacked Georgia. He attacked Georgia, but the whole world did not react. He basically accepted the invasion and division of Georgia. The Russian troops occupied 1/3 of the country. And what did the West do? Nothing. The great leaders continued to negotiate with Putin, to talk to Putin, to shake his hands. And then we had 2014 and the annexation of Crimea. And what did the West do? Impose some minor sanctions. That's it. But continue to negotiate with Putin, to shake hands with Putin. And shortly after Crimea, Putin sent troops to Donbass, the southeastern region of Ukraine, and lied that it was a revolt of local people against Ukrainian so-called nationalists. But it was obvious that it was a Russian invasion. It was obvious that we had Russian troops in Donbass. For 8 years, they stayed there and participated in the fighting against the Ukrainian government. They waged a war already. They started the war in Donbass in 2014. They started a war against Ukraine in 2014. 8 years ago, not right now. And what did the West do and the whole world do? What did they do? Basically nothing. They still negotiated with Putin. They bought gas and oil from Russia. and sanctions was minimal, and they actually did not affect Russia and the Russian economy. It was the shameful policy of appeasement. And that's why now we had what we have. And I'm very glad now that finally the US government changed the policy. I remember how Biden, I voted for him, and I'm glad that I did, how Biden was the first to call Putin the killer. And I was greatly impressed with yesterday's Biden's State of the Union address. It was a fantastic, great address that we waited for a long time, for many, many years. Now, the US government and the West Europe finally imposed severe sanctions against this regime. It's not only a fascist regime. I couldn't call it simply a fascist regime. It's much worse than fascist regime if we speak about Italian fascism. You know that fascists, of course, anti-liberal, horrible, bad, and so on, but they developed a welfare program in favor of the people, Italians. And even Hitler developed a welfare program and was a socialist. Hitler's regime uses fascist methods domestically and in his foreign policy, but he is worse than fascist. He is a gangster, a pure gangster, and the regime, it's a group of gangsters. It's a group of bandits who terrorizes not only Ukraine, but the Russian people. And I'm glad that finally the whole world, except a few countries, except China and India, imposed sanctions on Russia. I'm in Russia now. And I can tell you that the economic situation, not only political situation, but economic situation is terrible now. For the last few days, economy got severely crippled. And you know, when we came to Russia in October, $1 cost 71 rubles. Now it's cost about 150. So this is a catastrophe. And my wife and I, we try to get cash. We have, of course, you know, American debit cards, and we try to get cash in Russian banks. It's never been a problem, but now we couldn't get cash in any Russian banks. We could get cash only in UniCredit, a bank nearby. But the amount of cash we could get was limited. And there are lots of lines of people in front of the cash stations. And the political situation is also horrible. The Echo of Moscow and the most popular internet TV channel, RAIN, have been blocked. Actually, they were blocked yesterday. And the most liberal New Times magazine was shut down. And hundreds of people who demonstrated and took to the streets and demonstrated have been arrested and terrorized. So, you know that I read in the foreign press that number of articles about the growing anti-Putin protest in Russia. This is not correct. according to the most disappointing is that, and this is a true fact, the overwhelming majority of the Russians support Putin and support the war. According to the most recent polls, I mean, not by the official agencies, but by an independent, liberal, dissident agency that collected data, Putin's approval rating rose from 60% in July 2021 to 70% now. 68.8% of the Russians support Putin. So this is the most terrible what I can share with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Pentsov. Apologies for interrupting. We are nearly at the end of our time, so I'd like to start with a question from the audience. From Lindsay. She says that even given the background context and some insight into Putin's mind, it appeared likely that Ukraine wasn't planning on joining NATO anytime soon. So why now? Why did Putin choose this particular moment for an invasion?
It's a question for whom? For Clint or for me?
It wasn't directed to anyone specifically. Clint, perhaps you'd like to expand maybe on your talk of NATO?
Sure, yeah. Well, I mean, in a nutshell, the last part of my talk kind of comes to this. So from Putin's perspective, and it's horrendous, I don't agree with it, but Putin is trying to make Ukraine into an equivalent to, this a kind of a microcosm zone of Germany, where it's this battleground of ideologies, and Putin is trying to split it. At this point, right? Eastern Ukraine being the more Russian speaking, the stronger ties to the Soviet period, the mining and the coal that goes back to the Stalin period, the Donbass development, industrialization, and even the original names. If we go back to the original names, Donetsk, the original name in the 30s, not an original name, but in the 30s, it was renamed Stalina, and Luhansk was renamed Voroshilovgrad after a very famous Soviet general military figure who was very close to Stalin. But it's why now? Well, Putin, in his speech, two speeches that he delivered, and again, I don't agree with him. I don't support what's going on whatsoever. I am with Ukraine. I support Zelensky in this, but the rationale he's giving is he drew his red line. It was crossed, and he feels that he's backed into this corner, and he sees this is just like the last place where he has to make his stand. Again, for him, this whole thing is not just a battle to regain control over Ukraine. It's also a battle with the West and with what he sees as U.S. hegemony and control. He made this clear in the Munich speech in 2007, and no one wanted to pay any attention to him then. And he really returned to it, calling the U.S. an empire of lies repeatedly. Telling using a lot of phrases in his speech from card playing. The U.S. is stacking the deck. They're cheating. So Ukraine is this, for Putin, Ukraine is this battleground, and so now is the time. And he's trying to justify it by saying the Minsk agreements. Ukraine had supposedly 8 years. Of course, Putin was interfering the whole time and stoking things, and lots of propaganda. But he's saying, oh, Ukraine had 8 years. They haven't done anything. All they're doing is violating the rights of Russian speakers in Donetsk and Lugansk. And, and then he's also trying to brand the Ukrainians. He's really upset with the fact that Ukraine has made a really big issue out of the starvation in the 30s, the Holodomor, and they are going back and revisiting some horrible things that were done to Ukraine in the Soviet period. And Putin, that's really makes him very, very angry, of course. This was, sorry, yeah.
We're gonna,
Yeah, all right.
um,
It's
we
too much going on, but yeah.
Definitely. Well, thank you for that. And we have a question from Sue and Bob for Dr. Pantsoff. And I've been seeing this pretty commonly. In spite of your US citizenship, do you face any danger now in Russia by making comments like you have today with us? And are people in Russia concerned about speaking out against Putin?
Thank you. And I noticed the question you gave me before. Helen asked the same question about me. Thank you for your questions and for your concern. I don't care about Putin. I don't care about anything they could do, because enough is enough. And, in 2008, then Putin invaded Georgia, I began to feel Georgian. In 2014, when Putin invaded Crimea, I began to feel, Ukrainian. And I still feel that at least half of my blood is Ukrainian. I'm not Ukrainian, I have Jewish, have Russian. But, I hate Putin and I speak openly. And my wife and I, we signed petitions against the war. And one of the petitions already gained over 1 million signatures. But don't forget that the Russian population numbers 140 million. And so only 1 million signatures. That's the most popular petition, no to war. But I don't care what happened to me. I'm happy to be here because I'm on sabbatical and I can stay with my children. My children still live in Russia and my grandchildren still live in Russia. I thank God that I'm on sabbatical, you see, so I'm here. So, and I don't want to go anywhere and I'll be here with my children and I don't care about Putin. He's maniac, he's maniac. He's been in power for 23 years, just imagine 23 years in power. And he spent the last 2 years in his bunker, isolated. He got crazy. He's paranoid. That I just read a wonderful NBC article about his psycho. He's terrible guy who threatened the whole world 2 days ago with a nuclear bomb.
Absolutely. Well, we appreciate your bravery and for you joining us today. And another question from Dorje is, how are the sanctions that the West and other countries have placed on Putin, how can we expect those to affect him? Or will they create as much harm and damage as we hope?
That's the question to whom?
You're probably better to answer it, I think, more qualified in that sense for sure, because
Well, thank you, Clint.
Mhm.
You know that I've been talking about real tough sanctions for a long time, but I'm not a politician. And I have been talking about it to my students in my lectures on Russian history, on Chinese history, world civilization. And we expected reaction, we expected sanctions. And I will tell you more. The most important sanctions that, as far as I understand, Biden and the rest of the world still did not impose on Putin's regime, but it would be one of the most important. We need severe sanctions, not only on Putin, personal sanctions on the Putin elite, on the Putin oligarchs. That's good, and I'm grateful to Biden. But we need also sanctions against on the members of their families, on their wives, former wives, because many of them divorced, and they divorced on purpose, because they gave their assets to their former wives, claiming that they don't have any money, to impose sanctions on their children, to on their mother-in-laws and all the relatives, you see. Then we'll face the revolution of their wives. When the wives understood, the wives of the elite understand that they are not able to go to Milan doing shopping, they will influence the elite, and the elite will revolt against Putin. So I don't think that we can rely on the mass anti-war movement in Russia. If I go out, I'll be arrested immediately. So just imagine you live in the country occupied by military regime. You know what I mean. Suppose you live in Europe under Nazi. Will you go out to the street with the poster "Nazi go home"? You will be arrested immediately. You know what I mean. So, but I think that many things now depends on the elite. Nobody wants to commit suicide. If the crazy guy with the nuclear bomb wants to blow up the whole world, they need to do something about it. So we need more sanctions. And we are ready to suffer, but we need more sanctions.
Thank you, Dr. Pantsov, for putting that into more context for us. May I ask you to share the name of the book and its author that you had recommended?
FSB Blows Up Russia.
Fantastic, thank you. And maybe you could type that into the chat as well.
Yes, of course.
Thank you. Are there any closing comments from either Dr. Walker or Dr. Pantsov before we wrap up?
If people are interested in some more context for Ukraine, I really have learned a lot from, I haven't maybe I'm able to read it in full, but it's called Ukraine, What Everyone Needs to Know. It's by a Ukrainian born in Kiev, but he now teaches in Canada, a professor of history, Ukrainian and Russian history. And it's great. So it's Ukraine, What Everyone Needs to Know. It's part of a series, and he addresses so many different elements. I learned a ton, and I'm still learning from it, but that would be the book that I would recommend.
Thank you, Clint.
Mhm.
Dr. Pantsov, any closing remarks?
Yeah, I would also recommend a wonderful book by my acquaintance from Ohio, Karen Davisha, who published a book on Putin's kleptocracy.
Mhm.
It's a great book.
That is a good book. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you both.
And,
Dr. Walker.
the concluding remarks, I'm very grateful to you, and I wish Oksana all the best. And glory to Ukraine.
Yes. Love Ukraine. Yes, we will keep everybody updated on Oksana's next steps, and we are very grateful for her time with us today, and again for Dr. Walker and Dr. Pantsov for joining us. If you are interested in learning more, we also have a book recommendation. Senior Mansfield Fellow Steve Levine is an editor of a book on this topic that comes out on March 15th, titled Ukraine's Revolt, Russia's Revenge. The book is an eyewitness account by a US diplomat of Russia's brazen attempt to undo the democratic revolution in Ukraine in 2014. More information will be posted in the chat box. In addition, in support of Ukraine, we've been asked to invite everyone in Missoula to a fundraising event called the Missoula Community in Support of Peace and Humanity, which takes place next Wednesday, March 9th from 6 to 8 p.m. at Imagination Brewing. And for more information, please contact Fernanda at imaginationbrewing.com. That will be posted in the chat as well. Thank you to everyone for joining us today and take care. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander, so much.
Thank you, Clint.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Cameron. Thank you. Bye,
Thank
guys.
you.
Bye.